The merger announcement was scheduled for this morning, and Victoria Ashford had spent the entire night making sure nothing would go wrong. It was almost midnight when she finally stepped out of the strategy room on the executive floor of Lexington Capital. The building lived inside a tower of glass and white stone. At this hour, the lights created something cold and careful. There was no warmth here, no softness, no sense that human beings were meant to rest within these walls. Just the kind of glow that suggested the building itself did not believe in rest. Victoria moved through the corridor with the ease of someone who had never been told no. Her dark green dress fell perfectly over her shoulders. The V at the neck cut low enough to read as confidence. Never accident. Every detail was calculated. Every stitch, every color, every gesture had been planned. She had learned a long time ago that how you dressed was the first conversation you had with people. Before you spoke a single word, people were already deciding who you were. Whether you were someone to listen to, whether you were someone to fear, whether you were someone who belonged in this world of power and control. She controlled every part of that conversation. Behind her trailed James Chen, her assistant, with a thin tablet pressed to his chest. 2 department heads followed as well. They had been in meetings for 14 hours straight. Their eyes were tired. Their bodies were exhausted. They stayed because she stayed. That was how power worked in a place like this. That was how you built empires, by being the last person to leave, by showing everyone that you would not ask them to do anything you would not do yourself. That was how you became someone nobody could touch. She did not see Marcus Hayes at first. He stood at the end of the corridor in a slightly creased maintenance shirt. His shoes were scuffed at the toes, the kind of wear that came from moving through a building fixing other people's problems. Day after day, night after night. But what made him impossible to ignore once you noticed him was what he was carrying. In one arm, he held his fevered daughter. In the other hand, he held a thick gray folder neatly tabbed. Everything about it spoke of careful documentation, of someone who had taken time to prepare, to make sure the information was organized, to make sure it could not be dismissed as sloppy or careless. The little girl Sophie was maybe 6 years old. Her cheeks were flushed from fever, the kind of flush that spoke of a body fighting something, fighting hard and losing. Her arms wrapped around a stuffed rabbit so worn the seams had gone white. The edges of the rabbit were soft from years of being held, years of being loved and carried and clutched during sleepless nights. She buried her face into her father's shoulder when she saw the bright lights. The lights were designed to intimidate, to create an impression of power and control, to make people feel small. Then she peeked out again, because children always did, because they were curious even when they were scared, because their brains had not yet learned to stop wondering about things that frightened them. Marcus took one careful step forward. His daughter felt heavier in his arms than she had that morning. Or maybe he was just more tired. Maybe carrying her weight was harder when you were scared, when you were about to do something that might cost you everything. "Miss Reed," he said. His voice was not loud, and not pleading. "I need 2 minutes. 2 minutes." That was all he was asking for. Not a meeting, not a conversation. Just 2 minutes of time. Victoria's gaze swept over him, then over the child, then over the folder. She saw what she saw. A maintenance shirt. A sleeping rabbit. An interruption. Someone who did not belong on this floor. Someone whose presence here was a violation of the building's rules. Of how things were supposed to work. Of the order that Victoria had spent so long maintaining. But something flickered across her face for just a moment. Recognition, maybe. Or memory. Or something she pressed down before it could become anything useful. Before it could crack the armor she had spent so long building, the armor that had kept her safe. The armor that had cost her everything. 2 minutes for what she said. It was not a question. It was a sentence dressed as one. "Batch D14, Marcus said. "The thermal sensors are set to leave the dock at 11:55. The calibration data has been altered. If those units go into a cold chain medical line, the failure will not be caught until something is already lost." He was speaking clearly, speaking urgently, but not desperately. He was someone who knew what he was talking about. Someone who had studied this carefully. Matilda lifted her head at the sound of her father's serious voice. She did not understand the words. She did not know what thermal sensors were or what calibration meant. The technical language meant nothing to her, but she understood his tone that said this mattered, that this was important in a way that went beyond the normal concerns of the day, that this was serious. Her small fingers tightened on his collar. Victoria did not look at the folder. She looked at the corridor. She looked at the people now standing very still along its edges. The department heads, the assistant, the security officer. Everyone was watching. Everyone was waiting to see what Victoria Ashford would do. She made the calculation that a chief executive under pressure makes when she believes she cannot afford to flinch. She decided what this was. She decided he was an obstacle between her and the announcement she had been working toward for months. An obstacle between her and the board's approval. An obstacle between her and the future she had planned so carefully. An obstacle between her and the legacy she wanted to leave. "This floor is not a daycare," she said. The words were quiet, almost polite. They landed harder than a shout would have, because what she was saying was clear. What she was saying was, "You do not belong here. Your daughter does not belong here. This problem you are trying to tell me about is not my problem. I do not have time for this." Robert Walsh. The quality manager stood near the elevator bank. He knew the calibration data better than anyone. He had run the tests himself. He had seen the results. He had watched the numbers come through. He had known something was wrong. He had signed the override that morning under instruction. The instruction had come from above, from pressure that had been building for weeks, from hints and suggestions and carefully worded emails that said deliver on time or else, that said we need this shipment, that said I am counting on you. He looked at the floor instead of at Marcus. He could not meet Marcus's eyes. He could not face what Marcus was trying to do. He could not face his own complicity. "I am not asking you to trust me," Marcus said. His voice did not waver. "I am asking you to read 3 pages. 3 pages. That was all he needed. If she would just read it. If she would just take 90 seconds to read the data, to understand what was happening, to see the truth. Victoria took the folder from his hand. She lifted the cover. She turned 2 sheets without letting her eyes settle on a single line. She was not reading it. She was not trying to understand it. She was performing. She was making a show of looking at it. A performance for everyone watching. Then she pushed the folder back into his chest. The motion was so practiced it almost looked casual, but there was force in it. There was intention. There was anger. The clasp gave. Pages spilled across the marble in a slow white fan. The papers scattered, white against black marble. Numbers and data and the truth that could not be contained. Sophie flinched. The sound startled her. The sudden chaos of papers falling. The sudden aggression of the gesture. The sound of someone rejecting her father. Rejecting what he was trying to tell them. The rabbit slipped halfway out of her grip and dangled by one ear. In the silence that followed, no one moved. The 2 department heads kept their faces blank. They had learned how to do this, how to witness something and show nothing on their faces, how to protect themselves. James Chen's lips parted, then closed. He wanted to say something. His body wanted to react, but his training was too strong. His survival instinct was stronger than his conscience. The security officer near the elevators shifted his weight once, then went still again. It was Sophie who finally spoke. Her voice was so small that Victoria almost did not catch it. A child's voice, frightened, confused, hurting. "Daddy," the child whispered. "Did I make you get in trouble?" That was the question. That was the moment that would later be analyzed and discussed and quoted back to Victoria for the rest of her career at Lexington Capital. A 6-year-old girl asking if she had caused her father to lose his job. A child learning that her existence came with consequences. That being sick meant causing problems. That she was a burden. Something flickered across Victoria's face again. A moment of real emotion. Not controlled, not performed. She saw more than just a sick child. For half a second there was something else. Someone else's child, maybe. Someone else's fever. Someone else's question long ago. A memory that belonged to someone she used to be. Before she learned how to control everything. Before she learned how to turn herself into something that could not be hurt. A version of herself that she had buried so deep she had almost forgotten it existed. She closed that door before it could open. She pressed it shut with all the force she could muster, with all the will she could summon. "You are done here," she said to Marcus. Her voice was steady again, professional, back in control, hand in your badge. "Security will walk you out." Marcus did not argue. He had known this was possible. He had prepared himself for this outcome. He did not raise his voice. He did not cry. He did not beg. He set Sophie gently on her feet. He kept one hand on her shoulder so she would not feel alone. So she would know that this was not her fault. That her father was still there. That she had not caused this. He unclipped the badge from his belt and gave it to the security officer without looking at him. Then he knelt and gathered the pages from the marble. One at a time, careful to keep them in order. This was important. This was evidence. This was the truth he had tried to tell. This was proof that he had been right. When he stood up, he looked at Victoria, and for the first time, his voice carried. "By morning, you will understand what it costs to look at a person and only see how small they are," he said. His voice filled the corridor, not because he was shouting, but because he was speaking a truth that could not be ignored. He turned and lifted his daughter back into his arms. He walked into the elevator. Sophie was crying now. Quiet tears, confused tears, the tears of a child who did not understand why the world worked the way it did. The doors slid shut on the corridor, and on the silence he left behind. But Sophie's question hung in the air like a ghost. "Did I make you get in trouble?" Neither of them could know that this question would change everything. That it would be the thing Victoria could not forget. That it would be the thing that made her finally understand what she had done. 6 hours earlier, before any of this had taken shape, Marcus had been making grilled cheese in a kitchen the size of a large closet. The kitchen in his apartment was barely functional. 2 burners, a sink the size of a shoebox, but it was clean. Everything in it was arranged with care. He had learned to make do with what he had. Sophie was running a fever. He had noticed it that morning, the slight warmth when he kissed her forehead, the way she moved a little slower than usual, the way she complained about being cold when the apartment was warm. The babysitter had called to cancel. Her granddaughter was sick. Family emergency. She could not make it in. And Marcus understood. He understood what it meant to have family obligations that could not be put aside. Marcus felt Sophie's forehead and gave her a chewable medicine. And made the call he hated making. The call he made every time something like this happened. The call that meant he would have to figure something out. The call that meant his day was about to become more complicated. His shift was mandatory. He had a series of overnight checks scheduled at Lexington Capital. The kind of checks that could not be postponed. The kind that required his specific expertise. The kind that other people were counting on. and one of them involved a batch he had been quietly watching for weeks. A batch that did not feel right. A batch that whispered to him in the way Dado whispered to people who had learned to listen. People who had learned to trust their instincts. In the car on the way to the building, Sophie had asked him in her tired voice whether she was making things harder for him. She was 6 years old, and she was already learning that her existence came with a cost. That being sick meant causing problems. That needing her father meant taking him away from somewhere else. That her presence in his life was a burden he had to bear. Marcus looked at her in the rearview mirror, and he told her something she needed to hear. Something she needed to know about herself. "You have never made anything harder," he said. "You have only ever made things matter." He meant it with every part of himself that could mean anything. He tucked her into the staff break room at Lexington. He pushed 2 chairs together to make a small bed. He draped his jacket over her to keep her warm, and he put the rabbit into her arms. The rabbit that had been through everything with her. Every fever, every nightmare, every moment when the world felt too big and too scary. Every time she needed comfort. She fell asleep within minutes. He kissed the top of her head. He closed the door softly. And he walked down to the technical floor. The work was routine. Check the logs, verify the data, sign off on the systems. That was the job of a maintenance engineer. Day in and day out. The same work, the same careful attention to detail. You kept the lights on in other people's lives. You made sure the systems that powered their days continued to function. Their hospitals, their offices, their homes, their lives. While you drove home in the dark. While you went home to an apartment that was barely big enough for 2 people. While you raised your daughter alone and wondered if you were doing it right. While you made impossible choices between your job and her needs. But as Marcus reviewed the batch D14 data, something caught his eye. The thermal sensors showed failure points, 3 separate variance points. The tests had been run, the results were there. Clear as day, undeniable. The results had been logged. The data had been recorded. But somewhere between the test and the report, someone had changed the numbers. Marcus saw it because he had learned to see what people tried to hide. He had spent 3 years learning this. 3 years since his wife had died because a system failed to catch what needed to be caught. 3 years of studying data. Of learning to read the patterns that indicated when something was wrong. He saw it in the timestamp, in the comment field, in the particular way someone had softened the language, making it seem less serious, making it seem like something that could wait, making it seem acceptable. The data was trying to tell the truth. The report was telling a lie. He checked it 3 times to be sure. He did not want to make a mistake. He did not want to accuse someone of something they had not done. He did not want to risk his job on a misunderstanding. Yes, this was real. This was intentional. And this was deadly. The shipment was set to leave the dock at 11:55, just over 90 minutes away. Marcus thought about Sophie sleeping upstairs in the break room. He thought about the people who would receive these sensors. Real people, in real hospitals, trying to heal real illnesses, trying to save real lives. He thought about what would happen when they failed, when the cold chain broke, when the medication did not stay cold enough, when the systems that were supposed to protect people failed because someone had altered the data, because someone had put profit ahead of safety, and nobody caught it in time. He stood up. And in that moment, everything changed. He was going to tell someone. He was going to do this. And he was not ready for what it would cost him. But he had no choice. Robert Walsh, the quality manager, saw Marcus leave the technical floor. Their eyes met for a moment. Robert knew what was happening. He knew what Marcus had found. He knew what was coming. He had been expecting this. He had been dreading this. He had signed the override that morning. He had done it under instruction. He had done it because he had a mortgage and a family, because he had a daughter in college and a wife who had medical bills, because he could not afford to lose this job, because he had obligations that went beyond himself, and the pressure from above had been immense, but the shame was in his eyes. He knew what Marcus was about to do, and he knew he could not stop him. He could not be responsible for silence anymore. Marcus walked toward the elevator, toward the executive floors, toward Victoria Ashford, toward the collision that would change everything. Victoria had not slept. She sat in her office with the lights on and the city below her, the city that looked like it belonged to her, like she had built it, like it existed to serve her ambitions, like it was hers to control. She was building her defense line by line. She had spent the hours after the merger announcement preparing for the next morning. She was getting ready for questions, for objections, for anyone who might try to stand in her way. She was prepared for everything. She knew there would be questions. She knew there would be pushback. She had built her entire career on being 3 steps ahead of everyone else, on knowing what people would say before they said it, on preparing responses to objections they had not yet raised, on controlling every outcome. But she could not sleep. Her mind would not stop, would not slow down. James had brought coffee at 2 a.m. He set it on her desk without speaking. Both of them understood the ritual. Preparation was armor. If she built it well enough, nothing would touch her. If she anticipated every objection, every question, every possible challenge. If she was always ready, if she was always 10 steps ahead. By 6 a.m, she almost believed it. But when she looked in the mirror, she saw something else. A woman who was afraid. Not of failure, not of the board, not of the shareholders. Afraid of something deeper, something she had not allowed herself to name. And Victoria Ashford was not accustomed to fear. Then James appeared with a file. "You need to see this," he said quietly. His voice was different. His usual professional detachment was gone. There was something else in it, something that might have been pity or reproach. A chemical report had flagged an issue. Batch D14. The sensors had failed, just like Marcus had warned, just like he had tried to tell her. Victoria felt the floor move beneath her. Or maybe it was her own body. Maybe she was falling even though she was still standing. The shipment had left the dock at 11:55, exactly as scheduled, just as she had ordered, just as she had insisted. A hospital call had come in. A patient did not receive medication they needed. A real person. A real consequence. The sensor failure had not been caught in time. Victoria's stomach dropped. She sat down slowly. He had been right. Marcus had walked up those stairs carrying everything he loved and everything he feared. And he had been right. She called David Thornton, the board chairman, at 6:30 in the morning. "I made a mistake," she said. Her voice was different, smaller, less controlled than she had ever heard it, less like the Victoria Ashford that everyone knew. A serious one. "You need to bring in the person who was correct, and you need to see what I did wrong." David's voice was careful on the other end, cautious, like he was walking through dangerous territory, like he was not sure what he was hearing. "Victoria, what are you talking about?" "Just bring him in," she said. "The maintenance engineer named Marcus Hayes, and call a board meeting. We need to address this before the merger announcement." She hung up. And for the first time in her career, Victoria Ashford did not know what would happen next. The phone call came through to Marcus at 7:15 in the morning. He almost did not take it. He had been awake all night, holding Sophie, while her fever spiked. She had cried about the job he lost. She had asked if it was her fault. Her small body had shaken with fear and fever. He had held her and told her no. "Sweetheart, you made me tell the truth." That was the only thing you did. The voice on the phone was formal and professional, careful and controlled, like someone reading from a script. "This is David Thornton from Lexington Capital," it said. "Your concerns about batch D14 were correct. We would like to bring you in for a board meeting at 10 a.m. We need your expertise, and there is someone who needs to tell you something in person." Marcus thought about walking away. He thought about what these people had done to him, about the dismissal, about the humiliation, about his badge being taken, about his daughter asking if it was her fault. He thought about the humiliation in that corridor, about Sophie flinching, about his daughter learning that speaking the truth had consequences, that integrity had a price. He thought about Sophie asking if it was her fault, about his daughter carrying the weight of his job loss, about a 6-year-old girl learning that she was responsible for her father's misery, about spending the night holding her and wondering if he had made the right choice. But Sophie was awake now. She had heard the phone call. Children heard things. They picked up on energy and tone even when adults were trying to hide them, even when adults were trying to protect them. She was watching him with those clear eyes that seemed to understand more than children should understand. Eyes that seemed to see straight through to the truth. "Are you going to lose your job again?" she asked. There was no fear in her voice, just curiosity. Just a child trying to understand how the world worked. Just a child asking a question that adults were too afraid to ask. Marcus knelt down so he was at her eye level. "Maybe," he said. "I do not know." Sophie was quiet for a moment. She was thinking, processing, trying to make sense of the world she was learning to navigate, trying to understand her place in it. "You were right," she said, and her voice was so clear, so certain. "Maybe they need to know what to do now. Maybe that is why they are calling." He showered. The water was hot, and it felt good on muscles that had not relaxed in hours. He dressed. He chose clean clothes, not fancy, but clean. The kind of clothes a person wears when they are going to stand in front of people they need to respect them, when they want to show that they value themselves. He left Sophie with a neighbor who had watched her before, a woman named Mrs. Patterson who did not ask questions, who just opened her door and said yes, who understood that sometimes parents needed help, that sometimes children needed shelter. He drove to Lexington Capital. The building was the same, glass and white stone, cold lights. Everything looked exactly as it had when he had been humiliated in that corridor. Nothing had changed on the outside. The building did not care about the people inside it. It just existed, indifferent and powerful. But he was different now. He was walking through it as someone who had been correct, as someone who had told the truth. That made him different, even if nothing else had changed. Because he knew something now that he had not known before. He knew that he could do the hard thing. He knew that he could speak the truth, even when it cost him. He knew that he could survive what came after. David Thornton was waiting for him in a small conference room. Marcus Hayes. David said, extending his hand. His grip was firm. His eye contact was direct. "We owe you an apology." Marcus shook his hand but did not say anything. He did not need to say anything. Not yet. He had time. He had earned that. David explained what had happened, how the data had been altered, how the shipment had left, how the sensors had failed, how a patient had suffered because of it, a real person, a real consequence, a real suffering that could have been prevented, how Victoria Ashford had realized her mistake, and called the board to confess, had called them before the merger, had called them before anyone else had to know. The boardroom was on the 15th floor. When Marcus walked in, he saw David and Margaret Torres, another board member. She was looking at him with something that might have been respect, or gratitude, or both, like she was seeing something in him that other people had missed. He saw James Chen standing near the wall, the assistant who had watched Victoria push the folder back into Marcus's chest. who had seen Sophie flinch, who had lived with that knowledge, and he saw Victoria Ashford. She was sitting at the table. She did not stand up. She did not look away. She was waiting for him, waiting to see what he would do, waiting to face whatever came next, waiting to find out if redemption was possible. David opened the meeting. "We are here because data integrity at Lexington Capital has been compromised," he said. His voice was formal, official. This was serious. This mattered. "We are here to understand how it happened, and what we do about it." Robert Walsh testified first. His voice was shaking as he explained the pressure he had been under. The emails, the meetings, the subtle and not-so-subtle hints that if he did not approve the shipment, someone else would, that his job depended on his cooperation. He explained that he was afraid to say no. He explained that the system had been designed to make silence look like the safe choice, to make speaking up seem dangerous, to make complicity seem like survival. He explained that he had been a coward. His words hung in the room. Honest, true, painful, necessary. Margaret asked Victoria directly. "Did you know it was a mistake when you looked at him in that corridor?" Victoria did not hesitate. "Yes," she said. "Some part of me knew. I was afraid to listen to that part." Then Marcus spoke. He did not accuse anyone. He did not seek revenge. He simply explained what needed to change. "The pressure to succeed cannot come before the pressure to be safe," he said. "People at every level are caught in a system where speaking up is dangerous. That has to change. Not through a memo, not through new policies, through actual structural change. I will take this role," he continued, "but only if I have full authority. Only if this board backs every decision. Only if we protect the people who speak up in the future." His words were quiet, but they filled the room. They filled everyone who heard them. David looked at Margaret. Margaret nodded. David read the resolution aloud. "Victoria Ashford is relieved of her duties as Chief Executive Officer," he said with immediate effect. "Marcus Hayes will serve as Interim Chief Executive Officer. He will oversee an independent safety audit, and he will reconstruct the internal reporting structure." Victoria stood up. She looked directly at Marcus. "I am sorry," she said, "for how I looked at you, for how I looked at your daughter, for making a choice that cost you everything." Marcus said nothing, but he nodded. There was something in that nod that was not forgiveness, but it was recognition. It was the beginning of something that looked like respect. Victoria packed her office in the afternoon. There was no dramatic farewell. No one made a show of her departure. The quiet that surrounded her was thicker than any humiliation would have been, because it was the quiet of a building that had stopped needing her permission to breathe, that had learned to function without her control. Before she stepped into the elevator for the last time, she paused at the open door of the office that was no longer hers. Inside, Marcus was bent over a stack of documents at the long desk. His sleeves were rolled up. A black pen was tucked behind one ear. On the small couch under the window, Sophie was asleep. Her rabbit was pressed under her chin. His jacket was draped over her legs. For a long moment, Victoria simply looked at them. She had told herself in that corridor that he had been weak, that he had been weak for bringing his daughter into the building. She had decided that his vulnerability was a liability. She had chosen to dismiss it. Standing there now, she understood something different. He had carried his entire small world into the corridor with him, and he had still chosen to tell the truth. He had risked everything: his job, his reputation, his security, and he had done it not because he was trying to be a hero. He had done it because he was a father, and he could not do anything else. Victoria stepped into the elevator. She did not say goodbye. The doors closed on her reflection, and the building, after a moment, returned to its ordinary noise. But something had changed. something fundamental. Something that would ripple through the building for years to come. Marcus did not begin his first day with a press release. He began it with an order to halt Batch D-14 immediately. No units would leave the dock, not until an independent calibration audit had been completed. He signed a hold on every related part number. Then he opened the company-wide communication channel, and he sent a single message. "No one at Lexington Capital will be punished for filing a safety report," he wrote. "No one will be pressured into silence. Every previously closed warning will be reopened and reviewed. Any employee who has been pressured to alter data is invited to come forward and will be protected by the board." He paused before writing the final sentence. Because this sentence mattered. This sentence was the whole point. No one at Lexington should ever have to choose between doing the right thing and protecting their family. He hit send. The message traveled through the building faster than any earnings report ever had. People read it twice. Some read it 3 times. Quality engineers who had stayed silent for years looked up from their desks and met each other's eyes for the first time in a long while. A junior analyst in compliance forwarded it to her father. He had spent 30 years in regulated manufacturing. Her father called her back. His voice was rough when he spoke. "I'm proud of you for staying," he said. Robert Walsh wrote a private email to Marcus that afternoon. "I should have spoken up sooner," he wrote. "I let fear make me small." Marcus's reply was short, but it was everything Robert needed to hear. The old system was designed to make silence look like the safe choice, Marcus wrote. Your job now is to help build a new one, where telling the truth is actually safer. Sophie recovered from her fever. It took a few more days. But the fever broke, and she was Sophie again. Whole and healthy, and asking questions about everything. She wanted to know why people made bad choices. Why people were afraid to tell the truth. Why the world worked the way it did. Why adults did the things they did. She went back to school. She drew pictures of her dad at his new office. In her drawings, he had a window. In her drawings, he was smiling. 6 months later, Marcus was in a meeting with Robert Walsh and James Chen. They were reviewing the new safety protocols, the systems they had built together, the structures that had changed the way the company worked. It was the work that no one celebrated, but it was the work that mattered. Sophie had come by the office after school. She was carrying an art project, an assignment from her class. It was a painting of the building with 3 figures inside. One was her dad, one was Robert in his safety gear, and one was a woman with a sad face. "Is that?" Victoria Robert asked. Sophie nodded very seriously. "She made a mistake," Sophie said, "so I painted her sad. Because mistakes make people sad, but people can learn." The 3 men looked at each other. They did not know whether to laugh or cry, so they did a little of both. And in that moment, they understood something important. They understood that a 6-year-old girl had understood something that took adults so much longer to learn. That people are not just their worst choices. That redemption is possible. That we all make mistakes, and we all get to choose what comes next. Victoria had left Lexington Capital weeks ago. She did not work there anymore. She did not drive by often. But today she did. She had a client meeting nearby, and she took the long way. She passed the building. She saw the glass and white stone, the cold lights that suggested no one here believed in rest. She saw the directory in the lobby, new department safety operations, head Marcus Hayes. She did not go up. She did not call. She just acknowledged it. The fact that he was still there, still doing the work, still committed to something that would never make him famous, or rich, or powerful in the way she had understood power. That meant something to her. It meant that there was another way. That power was not the only thing that mattered. That doing the right thing was possible, even when it cost you. That integrity was its own reward. Later that evening, Marcus drove home with Sophie. They had stopped for ice cream. Sophie's was melting on her chin, and she did not care. "Do you think Victoria is okay?" Sophie asked. Marcus thought for a moment. He kept his eyes on the road. "I think she is learning," he said, "same as the rest of us." At Lexington Capital, they still measured success, but they measured it differently now, not just by what they delivered, but by whether everyone could speak truth in the process, not just by profit, but by the people who had been safe, who had been heard, who had been protected. The merger that Victoria had fought for so hard never happened the way she had planned it. The rezoning that would have displaced families was removed. The company became smaller, but it became something else too. It became a place where people could breathe, where people could tell the truth without losing everything. Victoria Ashford went on to lead a smaller firm. She spent less time building empires, and more time building systems where people could speak. Systems where people would not have to choose between telling the truth and protecting their families. She thought about that choice every day, about what it had cost her, but also about what it had taught her, about who she wanted to become. She and Marcus never became friends. They would see each other occasionally at industry events. There would be a nod, a moment of recognition, but nothing more, and that was enough. Marcus Hayes never became CEO of anything else, and he did not want to. He showed up every day and did the work that mattered. He raised his daughter to believe that integrity was more important than safety, that truth was stronger than power, that one person who refuses to be silent can change everything. Sophie Hayes grew up knowing something most children do not know. She knew that one person who tells the truth can matter, one person who will not accept silence, one person who carries their integrity into spaces that do not believe in it. That person can change everything. Not all at once, not dramatically, but change nonetheless. That is what happens when a father decides that his daughter matters more than his job. That is what happens when someone is brave enough to speak. That is what changes the world. One person, one truth, one choice, at a time. And if you are listening to this story and you recognize yourself in it, if you know what it feels like to stand alone with your integrity, if you know what it costs to tell the truth, if you have ever had to choose between safety and doing what is right, know this: you are stronger than you think. Your voice matters, and there are more people who want to hear the truth than you realize. Keep speaking. Keep choosing integrity. Keep doing the work that matters, because that is how the world changes. Not through force, not through power, but through courage. One person at a time.